Germany in the 1920s was a country living through some of the most dramatic, turbulent times in its history. When we think of the 1920s, we usually think of the glitz and glamour of jazz, flappers, and all that American jazz age energy. But in Germany, well, it was a very different vibe. Picture this: a nation just coming out of World War I, crushed by the Treaty of Versailles, dealing with hyperinflation, economic collapse, political chaos, and, strangely enough, some really groundbreaking advances in technology and culture. Let's dive into what life was really like in Germany during this pivotal decade. First off, let's talk about the economy because, honestly, it's the foundation of everything. After the devastation of World War I, Germany was saddled with the massive debt imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. The Allies basically said, "You're going to pay for all the damage." And if that wasn't enough, they were also dealing with the consequences of war: factories destroyed, farmland ruined, and millions of people left to rebuild from scratch. This leads us to hyperinflation. By 1923, the value of the German mark had plummeted so badly that people needed wheelbarrows full of money to buy a loaf of bread. It was chaos. Imagine paying for your lunch with a pile of bills so thick you needed to cart it around in a shopping cart. People were struggling to even get the basics, but they still had to pay their way through a country wrecked by the war. The economy didn't stabilize overnight. In fact, it took foreign loans and major economic plans like the Dawes Plan in 1924 to bring some sense of stability back to the country. This plan restructured Germany's debt and brought in more foreign investments, especially from the US. It wasn't perfect, but it allowed Germany to breathe for a little while. Even in the face of such hardship, Germany managed to stay afloat. But it was a delicate situation, and the scars from this era stayed with the nation. Now, while Germany was digging out of this financial pit, there were some unexpected bright spots. Despite the political chaos and poverty, the country was actually pushing forward in technology and innovation. You'd think that in the middle of all this, things like chemistry and engineering would be the last thing on anyone's mind, but German scientists were making some seriously impressive breakthroughs. We're talking about the creation of synthetic materials like Buna rubber and the development of new dyes. And they didn't stop there. German car companies like Mercedes-Benz and BMW were leading the way in automobile technology, making strides that would change the industry forever. And of course, you can't talk about the 1920s in Germany without mentioning film. Metropolis, the iconic science fiction movie by Fritz Lang, is one of the most famous exports from this era. It was a visual masterpiece that influenced science fiction for generations. Not only that, but Germany was also leading in aviation, experimenting with the Zeppelin airship and other aircraft. So, amidst the political instability and economic disaster, Germany was somehow at the cutting edge of both science and art. It's kind of wild to think about. But now, let's shift gears and talk politics. The Weimar Republic, which had been established in 1919, was struggling from the start. The country was trying to find its footing in a new democracy, while also dealing with a deep divide between left-wing communists and right-wing nationalists. In this chaotic political environment, the Nazi Party was starting to make waves. Hitler's rise wasn't instantaneous, but it began in the early 1920s. In 1923, the Nazis attempted their first big coup, the infamous Beer Hall Putsch. The failed coup didn't result in immediate power, but it did get Hitler and his party some much-needed attention. Beyond the Nazis, though, there were constant uprisings, political assassinations, and power struggles. Left-wing radicals, right-wing extremists, and everyone in between were clashing in the streets. The Weimar government, trying to hold everything together, struggled to maintain control. Meanwhile, the international community was treating Germany with suspicion. The Treaty of Versailles had left a bitter taste in many Germans' mouths, with people blaming the Allies, especially France and Britain, for their humiliation. While all this political instability was playing out, the social conditions were equally extreme. On one hand, you had the mass suffering caused by the economy, widespread poverty, inflation, and unemployment. On the other hand, Berlin became this incredibly vibrant cultural hub. It was like two worlds were colliding: You had the glamorous cabaret scene, avant-garde artists pushing boundaries, and a flourishing of theater, music, and literature. Berlin was buzzing with creative energy, with intellectuals and artists like Thomas Mann and Bertolt Brecht making their mark. But for the average person, this was a tough place to live. You might find yourself in the middle of a bohemian party one night and then face the stark realities of economic collapse the next. And then, of course, there's the rise of radical ideologies. With the Weimar government unable to offer solutions, many people turned to more extreme political groups. Communists, nationalists, and, yes, the Nazis were all gaining followers. The anti-democratic sentiments were growing stronger, and the groundwork was being laid for the horrors that would follow in the 1930s. But, believe it or not, there was some progress made in social welfare during the decade. The Weimar government invested in public health initiatives, things like vaccinations, sanitation, and efforts to combat diseases like tuberculosis. There was a rise in social welfare programs, though they were often limited due to the unstable economy. But for a country trying to recover from the chaos of war and revolution, it was a step in the right direction. Germany's ethnic makeup during this time was also shifting. While the population was predominantly ethnic German, the country saw an increase in minority communities. Jews, Poles, and other Eastern Europeans were part of the diverse fabric of German society, contributing to the country's cultural and economic landscape. However, as the decade went on, anti-Semitism grew more pronounced. This was in part due to the rise of Nazi ideology, which targeted Jews and other minorities. But even before that, there were tensions simmering beneath the surface as nationalist sentiment began to take hold. The cultural scene in Germany during the 1920s was nothing short of revolutionary. Berlin's nightlife was legendary, with cabarets and jazz clubs at the heart of the city's creative explosion. Artists and filmmakers were experimenting in ways that would influence generations to come. The Bauhaus movement, for example, transformed the world of architecture and design. Intellectuals were also diving into Germany's past, reinterpreting old legends and myths in new ways. It was a time of creative innovation, even as the country was grappling with so much pain. But we can't forget about the rise of secret societies and underground movements. The political instability, combined with the disillusionment many Germans felt, led to the growth of radical groups. Right-wing movements like the Freikorps and the Nazis began building power in the shadows, and the Kapp Putsch and Beer Hall Putsch were just the beginning of the violence and uprisings that would plague Germany for years to come. So, in the end, the 1920s in Germany were a time of incredible contrast. On one hand, there was incredible hardship, hyperinflation, political strife, and economic collapse. But on the other hand, Germany was also a hotbed of creativity, innovation, and social experimentation. It was a decade that laid the groundwork for everything that would follow, for better or worse. And while the Weimar Republic ultimately fell, the cultural and technological legacies of the 1920s continue to shape the world today. Thanks for tuning in to The World as We Know It and joining me in another chapter of world history. As always, there are more detailed notes in the description, and we welcome any requests or recommendations in the comments section. If you found this video helpful, entertaining, or educational, please consider liking this video and subscribing to support our channel. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.